There's a certain type of person who hears the words party this weekend and immediately starts mentally drafting an excuse. Not because they're sad, not because they're anxious, not because they hate people, but because deep down they would genuinely rather be alone. And for a long time, society got them completely wrong. We've spent decades confusing two very different states, loneliness and solitude. One is a wound, the other might actually be a strength. For years, psychology lumped anyone who enjoyed being alone into one big, suspicious category: introverted, loners, antisocial. That last label especially, as if liking your own company meant you were one bad day away from becoming a villain origin story. But then something interesting happened. In 2016, a group of psychologists at the University of Buffalo asked a question nobody had really taken seriously before. What if some people simply prefer being alone, not because they're afraid of others, not because they're damaged, but because solitude genuinely makes them feel better? They called this trait unsociability. And no, that's not antisocial behavior. Antisocial means hostility toward others. That's different. It's also not avoidance, which is driven by fear. Unsociability is calm, confident, intentional. It's the preference for your own company without resentment toward anyone else. And here's the plot twist. When researchers study people like this, they weren't struggling. They weren't isolated. They weren't emotionally unhealthy. They were doing fine, often better than fine. So what's actually happening in the brain of someone who truly enjoys being alone? First, their dopamine system works differently. You know how extroverts get a strong dopamine rush from social interaction? The energy of the group, the laughter, the constant exchange. People who prefer solitude reach optimal stimulation much faster. Their nervous system doesn't need as much input to feel satisfied. Think of it like spice tolerance. Some people need an entire jalapeno to feel anything. Others feel overwhelmed after a single flake of chili. Neither is wrong. They're just wired differently. And this is where it gets even more interesting. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for deep thinking, self-reflection, and complex problem-solving, becomes more active during alone time for these people. They're not doing nothing. Their brain is busy processing, connecting, and creating. Studies on creativity back this up consistently. Breakthrough ideas rarely happen in loud group settings. They happen in the shower, on long solo walks, late at night when the world finally quiets down. Einstein worked alone. Newton worked alone. Virginia Woolf famously wrote about the necessity of solitude in a room of one's own. Maya Angelou rented hotel rooms just to write in silence, even though she had a perfectly good home. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. But before you start labeling yourself, because I know half of you are already thinking this explains everything, there's an important distinction we need to make. Do you choose solitude? Or are you hiding inside it? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Not everyone who spends time alone is doing it for healthy reasons. Some people aren't embracing solitude. They're using it as armor, as protection from rejection, judgment, or the vulnerability that comes with real connection. And that doesn't make them broken. It just means something different is going on. Psychologist Abraham Maslow talked about this distinction years ago. He believed that healthy solitude comes from abundance, not scarcity. You enjoy being alone because you can connect, because you've experienced meaningful relationships, because you know solitude is a choice, not your only option. You're not running from people. You're running toward yourself. So the real question isn't, do you like being alone? The real question is why. If your answer sounds like recharge, create, think, process, you're probably in that healthy zone. If your answer sounds like safer, easier, less painful, that might be worth exploring more gently. Not to judge yourself, not to label yourself, just to understand yourself better. Because the people who truly thrive in solitude have figured out something most of the world is still learning. And that's where this gets really interesting. People who genuinely enjoy being alone have discovered something quietly radical. They've realized that being alone is not the same as being incomplete. Think about how we usually talk about relationships. My other half. You complete me. We're better together. We've built an entire cultural narrative suggesting that a person on their own is somehow unfinished, like a broken piece waiting to be matched. But people who thrive in solitude look at that story and feel something different. They don't feel empty, they feel whole, and this isn't arrogance. It's self-awareness. Research from Dr. Bella DiPaolo at UC Santa Barbara found that people who embrace being single and value solitude often maintain stronger, more diverse social connections than those who rely heavily on one primary relationship. They're not clinging. They're choosing. They don't expect one person to meet every emotional need. They spread connection across friendships, family, work, ideas, and community, which means something important happens. The quality of their alone time improves the quality of their social time. When you've recharged in solitude, you don't show up depleted. You don't show up resentful. You don't expect others to fix something inside you. You show up present. That's why people who enjoy being alone are often excellent listeners. They're not waiting to talk. They're not scanning for validation. They're already comfortable inside themselves. And this ability becomes even more interesting when you look at it through a cultural lens. In Japan, there's a word for this, hitori. It simply means alone, but without the negative weight we attach to it in the West. In Japan, being alone isn't treated as a failure of social life. It's treated as a legitimate state of being. There are restaurants designed specifically for solo diners, movie theaters with single seats, private karaoke booths meant for one person singing alone. No pity, no awkward questions, no assumption that something must be wrong. Meanwhile, in many Western cultures, eating alone still feels like a confession. Like you're supposed to explain yourself. Why are you alone? Who stood you up? What happened? But people who genuinely enjoy solitude don't feel the need to justify it. They understand something subtle but powerful. Connection is meaningful only when it's chosen, not when it's required to fill a void. And in an age of constant notifications, constant availability, and constant performance, that understanding becomes rare. Being alone, truly alone, allows you to hear yourself think, to notice patterns, to process emotions without distraction. It gives you a baseline, a sense of who you are when no one is watching. That's why people who prefer solitude often have strong routines, quiet rituals, non-negotiable alone time. Not because they're rigid, but because those moments keep them regulated. This doesn't mean they don't value relationships. It means they don't confuse connection with constant proximity. They can connect deeply and still step back. They can love people without losing themselves in them. And that's the real trait society tends to miss. People who like being alone aren't disconnected from the world. They're connected to themselves first. So if you're someone who cancels plans without guilt, who feels restored after a quiet evening, who prefers depth over noise, you're not broken, you're not antisocial. You're not missing out. Your brain is simply wired to find meaning in stillness. Just make sure solitude remains a choice, not a shield. A place you visit, not a place you hide. Because the healthiest relationship with being alone is one where you can leave it as easily as you enter it. And if this video helped you put words to habits you've never been able to explain, the videos on screen aren't random. One breaks down how your brain processes stimulation and why certain environments drain you faster than others. The other explores why quiet people often think more deeply and notice things most people overlook. They don't just continue this topic. They answer the questions this video probably just raised. I'll see you there.